For generations, Little House on the Prairie captured the heart of America, a story of family, faith, and survival on the frontier. But behind that beloved tale stood a woman whose real life was far more complex and heartbreaking than the simple world she created. Laura Ingalls Wilder. The name itself brings nostalgia, warmth, and images of simpler times. But few realize that the author who painted such an idyllic portrait of pioneer life also endured unimaginable hardship, loss, and struggle. Her books may have inspired millions, but they were born from pain, poverty, and perseverance. As a young girl, Laura faced hunger, disease, and devastating loss on the harsh American frontier. As a woman, she battled rejection, grief, and the collapse of her dreams before finally finding her voice as one of the most iconic storytellers in history. And yet, the final years of her life were nothing like the happy endings she once wrote. Tonight, we look back at the real Laura Ingalls Wilder, not the legend but the woman. The heart, the struggle, and the truth behind the Little House. This is her untold story, and what became of her in the end will break your heart. Long before she became a literary icon, Laura Ingalls Wilder was simply a little girl trying to survive on the unforgiving American frontier. Born in 1867 in a small log cabin in Pepin County, Wisconsin, Laura's childhood was nothing like the gentle stories that would later charm the world. Her life was one of constant movement, chasing hope across endless miles of untamed wilderness. Her father, Charles Ingalls, was a dreamer. He believed that somewhere out there, beyond the next hill, a better life was waiting. So the family moved, again and again, from Wisconsin to Kansas, from Minnesota to South Dakota. Each new beginning came with the same promise, and the same heartbreak. Life on the prairie was brutal. Summers brought blistering heat and swarms of grasshoppers that destroyed their crops. Winters brought hunger and bitter cold. There were nights when the family went to bed without food, wrapped in thin blankets while the wind howled through the cracks in their wooden walls. But even in those moments, Laura's spirit burned bright. She was observant, curious, and strong, qualities that would later make her one of America's most beloved storytellers. Her mother, Caroline, taught her to read and write, while her father filled her imagination with music and stories. Those memories, both painful and beautiful, became the foundation of the world she would one day recreate in her books. Yet behind the nostalgia of Little House on the Prairie lies a darker truth. The real Laura faced far more suffering than her readers ever knew. Disease, poverty, and isolation haunted her family's journey. Her sister Mary went blind after contracting scarlet fever, a tragedy that left a lasting mark on Laura's heart. From then on, she felt a deep sense of responsibility, determined to help her family survive no matter what it took. As she grew older, the hardships didn't stop. Laura worked as a seamstress, a teacher, and a farmhand, often before she was even old enough to rest. Every penny mattered, every harvest was uncertain, and every day was a fight against the elements. Still, there was love, simple, quiet, enduring love. When she met Almanzo Wilder, a hard-working farmer with the same fierce independence she carried, it was as though two restless spirits had finally found each other. Together they dreamed of building a life of stability, something neither had truly known. But fate wasn't kind. Their early years were marred by crop failures, illness, and tragedy. Their first child, a son, died shortly after birth. Their home burned down. Their farm nearly went under. Yet through every loss, Laura endured. Decades later, when she began to write about her childhood, she transformed those painful memories into stories of hope, courage, and family. Readers saw a world of simplicity and warmth, not realizing that every word was written by a woman who had lived through hardship most could never imagine. Her books were more than stories. They were her truth softened by love. She wanted people to see that life, no matter how hard, could still hold beauty. And though the little girl on the prairie grew into a woman of strength, her trials were far from over. Because while her stories made her famous, the road to success came with heartbreaks that would follow her for the rest of her life. By the time Laura Ingalls Wilder reached adulthood, she had already lived a lifetime of hardship. She had endured hunger, loss, and endless uncertainty, yet none of it had broken her. Those struggles, in fact, became the quiet strength that defined her. In the late 1800s, Laura and her husband, Almanzo, settled in Mansfield, Missouri. They built their small home, Rocky Ridge Farm, from scratch, slowly turning barren land into a place of stability. It was here, surrounded by rolling fields and the soft hum of nature, that Laura began the next great chapter of her life, not as a pioneer girl, but as a writer. She never planned on becoming famous. Writing began as a necessity, a way to share her practical wisdom through newspaper columns and farming articles. Her words were simple yet honest, reflections of the land, family, and endurance. But when her daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, a successful journalist, encouraged her to record her childhood memories, something extraordinary began to unfold. Laura hesitated at first. Her memories were filled with hardship, the hunger, the fear, the constant moving. But she also remembered love, laughter, and her father's fiddle playing under the glow of a kerosene lamp. She began to write, and those memories poured out like water from a well that had waited too long. The result was Little House in the Big Woods, the first in a series that would forever change American literature. Her stories celebrated resilience, faith, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. They reminded readers of where America had come from, a time of simplicity, family, and determination. But behind that success, Laura faced her own emotional battles. Many readers believed the Little House books were pure nostalgia, a happy, wholesome picture of pioneer life. But for Laura, each page carried a shadow. She had softened the truth, removing the deepest pains to protect the dream her readers wanted to believe in. The real Prairie had been harsh and often cruel. Laura's partnership with her daughter, Rose, was also complicated. Though they loved one another deeply, tension often arose. Rose was ambitious, bold, and fiercely independent, much like her mother had once been. She helped edit and promote the Little House books, but her influence sometimes blurred where Laura's voice ended and her own began. For years, debates have raged over how much of the series was Laura's work and how much was Rose's editing. Still, Laura remained humble. She wasn't chasing fame or recognition. She wanted her stories to give people hope, especially those struggling through the Great Depression. Her books reminded readers that perseverance and faith could endure any hardship. Yet, as the world embraced her as a beloved author, Laura's private life grew lonelier. Her husband's health declined, her daughter moved away, and though her books sold millions, the financial rewards were modest. Fame came late, and with it, a heavy cost. Through it all, Laura stayed on her farm, tending to her chickens, writing by hand at her kitchen table, and finding comfort in the quiet rhythm of rural life. To outsiders, she was the embodiment of peace and wisdom. But inside, she was still that little girl on the prairie, holding on, surviving, and searching for the light in dark times. And as the years passed, that light began to fade. Because while her words would live forever, the woman who wrote them faced a heartbreaking final chapter few ever knew about. By the time Little House on the Prairie became a household name, Laura Ingalls Wilder was already in her 60s. Her gentle stories of frontier life had touched millions. But fame had arrived late, and it came with a bittersweet shadow. While children across America adored her books, picturing a golden world of family love and endless prairie sunsets, the woman behind those words was quietly growing old and tired. The success that had once filled her with pride now reminded her of everything she had lost along the way. The people, the places, and the simple joys that no fame could replace. Laura's life on Rocky Ridge Farm remained modest. Even as her books sold across the country, she lived without extravagance, raising chickens, baking bread, and keeping the same routines. She always had. She never forgot what it meant to struggle, and she refused to live beyond her means. But as the years passed, the isolation of the Ozarks became heavier. Her husband, Almanzo, the steadfast partner who had shared her struggles for more than 60 years, began to decline. His strength, the same strength that had carried them through blizzards, droughts, and heartbreak, started to fade. Laura cared for him with quiet devotion. even as her own health began to fail. Friends recalled how she rarely spoke about her fame. To visitors, she was simply Mrs. Wilder, sitting on her porch in a worn dress, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant, as if still watching the horizon for her father's wagon to appear. When Almanzo passed away in 1949, at the age of 92, Laura's world changed forever. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. The man who had walked beside her through every chapter of her story was gone. And though she continued to live at Rocky Ridge Farm, her spirit seemed to fade with him. Her daughter, Rose, remained in touch, but their relationship was strained by distance, both emotional and physical. Rose's success as a journalist had taken her to faraway places, and while she loved her mother, their conversations were often marked by silence and unspoken tension. The woman who had once helped Laura find her voice was now too busy to hear it. By the early 1950s, Laura's eyesight weakened, her memory dimmed, and her once steady hands trembled. The typewriter that had given life to her words now sat untouched. Fans sent letters from across the world, but she rarely had the strength to answer them. Still, she remained gracious, grateful for the readers who loved her, even if they never truly knew her. She often said she hoped her books would remind people that it is the sweet, simple things of life which are the real ones after all. Those words carried the quiet wisdom of a woman who had endured everything, poverty, loss, and loneliness, and still chose to see beauty. As the end of her life approached, Laura became a living symbol of the America she had written about, enduring, humble, and quietly fading into history. The Prairie she once knew was gone, replaced by highways and cities. The world had moved on, but her stories remained, frozen in time, preserving the spirit of a life that had never truly left the land. When Laura Ingalls Wilder passed away in February 1957, just 3 days after her 90th birthday, she left behind more than books. She left behind a legacy of resilience, courage, and unshakable faith in the human heart. But her final years were lonely, a silent reminder that even the brightest lights can fade in the quiet corners of history. When Laura Ingalls Wilder passed away in 1957, the world mourned quietly, not for a celebrity, but for a storyteller who had given voice to a forgotten era. She left behind 8 little house books, a modest farmhouse in Missouri, and a legacy that would grow far beyond anything she could have imagined. But the story didn't end with her death. In many ways, that's where it truly began. In the decades that followed, Laura's words found new life. Generations of children discovered the Little House series, finding in her stories a reflection of the American spirit, courage, simplicity, and the belief that family could endure anything. Her writing became more than nostalgia. It became a touchstone for hope. Then came the 1970s, when Little House on the Prairie was adapted for television. Michael Landon brought Laura's words to life, and suddenly, a new generation fell in love with the Ingalls family. Millions tuned in each week to watch the struggles and triumphs of pioneer life, not realizing that behind those bright prairie sunsets was a life that had once been far darker. For the world, Laura Ingalls Wilder became a symbol of innocence and perseverance. But for scholars and historians, her legacy grew more complex. As time passed, debates began about how her books portrayed Native Americans, the frontier, and the hardships of that era. Critics questioned whether her romanticized view of pioneer life ignored the suffering of others, and yet, through all the debates, her impact endured. Because at its core, her work was never about politics. It was about people, about finding faith in hunger, laughter in loss, and beauty in survival. Even now, nearly 70 years after her passing, the Wilder name still carries weight. Her home, Rocky Ridge Farm, has become a museum, preserved almost exactly as she left it. Her writing desk by the window, her books on the shelf, her spirit in every corner. Visitors from around the world walk those quiet rooms, feeling as though they've stepped into the very pages of her stories. But there's an undeniable sadness too, the kind that lingers when you realize that the woman who brought joy to millions spent her final days in near solitude. Fame had finally found her, but it came too late to fill the emptiness that time had carved into her heart. Her daughter, Rose, outlived her by 8 years. When Rose passed away, she left her mother's literary estate to a library foundation, ensuring that Laura's words would continue to live on, even as the world that inspired them faded into memory. Today, Little House on the Prairie remains one of the most beloved series in American history. It continues to teach lessons about perseverance, humility, and love, lessons that feel just as relevant in today's complicated world. Laura once wrote, "The real things haven't changed. It is still best to be honest and truthful, to make the most of what we have, to be happy with simple pleasures." Those words could have been her final message, a reminder from a woman who had seen everything and still believed in goodness. Her life was not easy. Her fame was not glamorous, but her legacy, quiet, enduring, and profoundly human, reminds us that even the smallest voices can echo through history. Laura Ingalls. Wilder didn't just tell America's story. She was America's story, brave, humble, and forever searching for home.